Trump, I think, feels very comfortable with cutting deals with dictators. And he feels very, very closely connected to Putin and to other folks like that. And he has no desire to have America be a moral leader or a leader of democracies or a leader of the free world. Trump is someone who has always said he's going to break the system. And I think that started to look really good to a lot of people. And that's why you had Trump in 2016. And ultimately, that's also why you had Trump in 2024. I'll give you an example. Rural hospitals. Something like 50% of doctors in rural hospitals are foreign born. If you were to deport those people, or if you were to stop letting them in, whole communities will not be able to access healthcare.
Well, I'm an entrepreneur. The first thing you need, why am I not an entrepreneur in India? I was born in India. I grew up in India. And it is because you have no idea what the law will be tomorrow or today evening.
What we're seeing now is that a lot of the policies that Trump is pursuing are ultimately disastrous for American citizens. And so a great example of that is the tariffs.
Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Evan Munsing. He is running for Congress. He works with small businesses, helping them raise capital, helping them grow their business, their revenues, ideally not their costs, so that they become more profitable. And today we are going to discuss a very important topic with this fine chap, a very sporty chap actually from Colorado. Can America lead the world after the Donald Trump era? So Evan, welcome.
Thank you, Atul. Great to be here.
Great. And we have a pretty meaty discussion, and we are discussing something that has been on a lot of people's minds. I've just finished reading the National Security Strategy, which I read thrice, cover to cover, highlighted, underlined, annotated. Hopefully when I'm dead, someone will procure a copy at an auction. I'm not holding my breath, though. But let's get cracking. After World War II, the US created a new world order. It was a different order to the one that existed, say, after World War I or the Concert of Europe, which emerged after 1815. After 1945, the US was the global top dog. That is why the UN is in New York, not Geneva, unlike the League of Nations. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US had its unipolar moment. America is still the country with the biggest GDP, the most powerful military, and incredible soft power. Harvard and Hollywood have no rivals. Yet, to echo good old William Shakespeare, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Here, let's replace the US with Denmark, although the Danes might think, things are rotten too, because the US wants Greenland from them.
That's true.
And my question, my opening question to you, it's a very simple question. What has gone wrong with American leadership?
Yeah, so I think it's probably important to put this context in a little bit of discussion. America has always believed itself to be a moral leader, right? There's this notion that America is the shining city on the hill. It is an example of freedom, of prosperity, of moral certitude for the world. And that goes back into the 1700s, even further into the 1600s. So it is really enshrined in what it means to be.
Make a plug for the podcast I do with a retired CIA, Glenn Carl. It's called The Dialectic. And we covered how his ancestors arrived on the Mayflower. So there's a full podcast on a new telling of an old story in The Dialectic. And we cover all of what you said in some detail.
Great.
So it goes back to 1620. right at the beginning.
Yeah, so I think all of that's to say, like, part of what America is, and part of how Americans see themselves, is that we are leaders in the world. We stand for values of prosperity, of peace, of quiet strength, and of democracy, of course. And the Trump administration and the MAGA movement has really upped that on its head. And Donald Trump do right now is, and you read this in the national security document, is it's completely writing away and erasing those core notions of America as the leader in the world. America stands for democracy and protects its allies. And America wants strong trading relationships with its partners, because that's a way to forge a better, more peaceful, more prosperous world that not only benefits the world, but really benefits the U.S. And so the world
to be fair, they do talk about promoting American business and trading relationships with allies. To be fair, they do, but they retreat from the post-war order into a more spheres of influence order, and the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine is the new focus. Yeah. But it's not as black and white as some of the MSNBC or some of the other bloggers would make it out to be.
No, that's fair. I was thinking specifically about the language they have in there about Europe. And Europe obviously is a huge trading partner historically.
The risk of civilizational erasure.
Yeah. And so
Europeans are furious, by the way. Europeans, I meet European diplomats, I shouldn't say every other day, but every week. Yeah. And they are incandescent with rage.
I can only imagine. And I would think, particularly with everything that's going on in Ukraine, that's probably like very, very frustrating for them. And you are seeing Donald Trump very specifically try to retrench into sort of the great game of the 1800s. So carving out these spheres of influence in which America, under the Trump administration, is really saying, we're going to stick in the Western Hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere is ours. And we're going to relinquish leadership over the globe to nations like Russia, and Trump and Witkoff are trying to cut a deal with Putin right now, to China, and we're going to ignore all of that. And maybe there's a little zone of interest carved out in the Middle East based on what's going on there right now. But it is this idea that Trump, I think, feels very comfortable with cutting deals with dictators. And he feels very, very closely connected to Putin and to other folks like that. And he has no desire to have America be a moral leader or a leader of democracies or a leader of the free world. And I think that's very troubling. And it should be very troubling to Americans that we've totally erased the idea of America as a moral leader from how we think about what it means to be an American, but also what it means to be the nation of the United States and how we should play in the world.
So, you've raised an important point about America's global leadership, and it fundamentally ties down or ties into values, because that leadership comes from values, and one of them you said democracy, one of them you said essential freedoms. Of course, one could argue it is also free trade, which after 1945 and the experience of Smoot-Hawley in the 1930s, beggar thy neighbor, led to all sorts of institutions. But, and here's the big BUT, a lot of people counter that and say that leadership is expensive. America runs big deficits. America now has a military-industrial complex. America simply cannot afford to lead. What do you say to that, Evan?
Yeah, so I do think it's important to just be very clear about what some of the real arguments are for why America should take care of America first. So I think there are a couple of things to note. One is the wars in Iraq. So I'm a veteran of Afghanistan. I was a Marine Corps officer, infantry type, fought in Afghanistan. And I think the common sentiment from veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan was we came home after fighting these wars that ultimately we lost, right? We spent decades fighting them.
A lot of
and it
money
felt like
too.
it was an exercise. Sorry?
A lot of money too. Blood and treasure,
Yeah.
both.
Yeah, blood and treasure was spent on Afghanistan and Iraq for not really any good reason and for not any end that we could really stake a claim to right now. Obviously, the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan, which is just atrocious. And I think most Americans came out of that experience feeling like we'd been lied to. Certainly, veterans feel like our sacrifices were not respected by people in D.C., and that folks in office were far more focused on how they win their next election than in what it actually means to be a leader or a decision maker or a policy maker. And I think that's important as a reason why a lot of Americans felt like it is important to pull back from that leadership role because of those mistakes that were made in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's kind of one part of it. I think there is also, it's important that we acknowledge that the trade regime that kind of lasted from Reagan until very late did end up sending a lot of American jobs overseas, and our relationship with China from the 1990s onward was fundamentally bad for a lot of American workers, right? We went through decades of American jobs, great manufacturing jobs, going overseas, and China had a deliberate economic policy of undercutting American businesses, of sponsoring Chinese businesses that would export to the U.S. so they could keep their prices low, as well as like economic espionage against the U.S., theft of intellectual property and trade secrets, and then also obviously deliberate scams and cyber attacks, not only against the U.S. Security apparatus, but also against individual Americans through like Salt Typhoon and all these other programs. And so I think all of that's made Americans very leery of sort of that 1950s world order that worked for a long time. And then it kind of disappeared and it started to seem to work against us as a nation.
If I may add something very quickly, I think it was not just that both these phenomena happened, but also that there was a willful denial of the daily reality of working class people. And I drove across America 4 times. I'm an ex-officer too, as you know. I drove north, south, east, west. I went to a lot of working class small towns. And the story was the same again and again and again. The moment you moved away, a little bit away from the coast, and even right on the coast, there are rundown towns. And the story was that, look, jobs have gone. There's an opioid crisis. What do we do? And there have been movies on this as well, that for short-term profits, private equity for short-term profits, which is quarterly results. I have friends who are CEOs, friends who came out of Wharton and Harvard and all the top business schools, and they say, look, we are I run a publicly listed company. If I have 2 bad quarters, I'm out. So that complete lack of long-term thinking and the focus on shareholder return did not serve the worker very well. And then to be told that everything was perfect, and to be told that it would just be switching and better jobs would come. It was not just the fate of the workers themselves, but the narrative which did not acknowledge their suffering, or did not acknowledge their, if not suffering, their decline in living standards, that angered them. That is why in 2016 I predicted the rise of Trump.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point also, because you did have successive administrations, both Republicans and Democrats, claim that unrestricted free trade and opening up relationships with China would be good for all Americans. And I think there was sort of this deal with the devil that was made, but not publicly made, which was that people in office thought that getting a cheaper flat screen TV was worth the trade-off of sending American jobs overseas. And at the end of the day, it's nice to have a $200 flat screen TV, but that doesn't compensate for the fact that you've lost your job. that your town has been hollowed out, that you can't get good health care.
Mm-hmm.
And of course,
consumers profited, citizens suffered, and say shareholders profited and workers suffered.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, citizens are workers. They're also consumers.
Mm.
And so citizens are both consumers and workers. They're producers and they buy things. And so you can benefit from cheaper consumption of common goods, and that's good. But if the long-term problem is that you're losing your job and ultimately you can't afford those goods in the future, or that things become increasingly out of reach, that's obviously that's a negative spiral that we don't want to go into. And it is fundamentally the job of government to be thinking long-term, mm-hmm. and in economic parlance, to be mitigating those negative externalities that come from business decisions. And I think really at the end of the day, it comes down to Congress and the White House in a very real way relinquish their responsibility to think long-term for Americans, mm-hmm. in order to make promises that they never could deliver on. Mm-hmm. And that ultimately is why Trump came on the scene, right? Because if you're an American who's being left behind, and there are a lot of Americans who are being left behind, you've been promised so much, mm-hmm. you're frustrated with the system, mm-hmm. and whatever else you say about Trump, Trump is someone who has always said he's going to break the system. And I think that started to look really good to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And that's why you had Trump in 2016, and ultimately that's also why you had Trump in 2024. But what we're seeing now is that a lot of the policies that Trump is pursuing are ultimately disastrous for American citizens. And so a great example of that is the tariffs. So along with sort of this view of the great game and of carving up one of the spheres of influence, Trump also had kind of mercantilist view of the economy, which is that trade is a zero-sum game. We should put tariffs in place, and we should use our hard power to control the world economy. And at the end of the day, what a lot of those things have done, and tariffs are a great example of that, is actually starting to alienate our trading partners while driving up consumer costs. And so the way tariffs work is, as you know, but maybe some of your listeners don't, is that tariffs are paid by American businesses. So if you import something from overseas, coffee is a great example of this, right? We don't grow coffee in the US, but we consume a lot. I consume a lot every day. American businesses pay the tariff on coffee.
You're running for Congress. You're living on coffee, mate.
Yeah. American businesses pay for coffee when it enters the border, and that cost is passed on to consumers. So you're not punishing the person on the other side of the fence. You're not punishing Costa Rica, who's growing the coffee. You're punishing the American consumer, and so it's actually driving up consumer costs. And that's fundamentally problematic, because now we're in a system not only where American workers are making less and less money adjusted for inflation, but also consumer costs are rising. Mm-hmm. And then other core services like healthcare are also rising. We saw the ACA subsidies expire. Yeah. Housing is getting more expensive. Mm-hmm. And so you're really getting squeezed by both ends, right? Mm-hmm. You're not making as much money, and all your costs are going up. Mm-hmm. And you're really pinched right now if you're an American. And I think that's true for 80% of Americans. And we're all losing out because of this current environment that we're in. And that's very problematic.
Okay. So you've acknowledged mistakes in the globalization era, the unipolar era. You've talked about the cost of living crisis. And so let me bring you back to, how does America afford its global leadership, right? Yeah. Maybe what Trump represents is a symptom, not the cause. Maybe because America's economy is stretched, maybe that's why you have this phenomenon of the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. What would you say to that, sir?
No, I mean, I think that's true, right? Like, Trump did not create everything himself. He's part of a broader system. Mm-hmm. And I think Democrats often do themselves a disservice by not actually understanding these kind of fundamental issues. And I think if you, I don't know if you pay attention to it, but the DNC just quashed a report that they commissioned to learn from the 2024 mistakes.
I'm well aware of it. It has left some of my younger friends, and I can't take names because they have their political careers ahead of them. So let us just keep it, shall we say, hush hush off the record on the QT, like Danny DeVito.
I don't want to. I shouldn't get down that tangent because we spent a day talking about that. But I think it is to just say, like,
yes,
there are problems that Trump causes, and there are problems that we as Democrats need to acknowledge and own up to.
And that report is actually candid. That is not a bad report.
No. Yeah.
It says some uncomfortable truths.
Yeah. And look, we all know mistakes were made, right? You don't learn anything if you don't acknowledge them. No. And you can't move on and do better if you don't learn from your mistakes.
So let's move on. Talking of moving on, let's move on with the themed discussion, right? So I have a very dear friend in the US government called Francis Flavin. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant chap. He is from Massachusetts, taught at one of the University of Texas campuses. A man who studied history, like you. A man who studied computer science for undergrad, then did a PhD in history, and then has gone back to computer science. So he's a polymath. But Francis has a great interest in international relations. I hope he gets appointed ambassador one day. Very pleasant, very articulate, very intellectual. And he always poses this question whenever we talk about economics and politics, whenever there's a major event, there's a trend, whether there's a crisis, he says, is this a feature or is this a bug? My question to you is the Trump version of American power and American foreign policy and American leadership a feature or is it a bug?
Well, I think if you're Trump and if you're people inside his close circle, it's very much a feature. But I think what you said a moment before the question was interesting, which is that there are these sort of overarching trends. And I think trends come in bunches, right? And it's important to understand that, like, the things that are intersecting right now is an increasing consolidation of power in the executive branch, which is like reaching its pinnacle under Trump, where he's really taking a lot of
theory of unitary. Theory of unitary executive. We have a podcast on that too with Glenn. Glenn Wax is lyrical about it. But carry on.
Yeah. Failures of American foreign policy, both in getting involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also in paying for international security without having other people like Europe pay for their fair share of NATO, which is very frustrating to Americans. And then jobs going overseas and American workers and businesses being hurt by that. So all these trends are coming together under Trump. And if you're Trump, having this sort of Monroe Doctrine-esque view of foreign policy and a mercantilist view of the economy is very much a feature. And if you're Trump himself and not just his administration, that gives you a lot of individual power over both the American economy, but also over our foreign relations. And you've seen Trump very eager to cut deals himself. And one of the things the tariffs did was it made Trump sort of the deal maker in chief. And so people came to him.
By the way, he uses that term on the White House website.
Oh, really? I didn't actually know that.
Yes. Deal maker in chief is on the White House website. Or deal maker in chief.
Does not surprise me, I guess. So I think if you're Trump, this is very much a feature. This is exactly what he wanted, which was he wanted just a tremendous amount of control over the future and over adversaries, and the ability to cut individual deals with people he liked and people who come to him on their knees begging. And that's exactly what's happened. I think if you're part of the MAGA movement, originally this was probably a feature, but I think now it's becoming a bug for two reasons. One is the offshoot of the Monroe Doctrine is that Trump is now sees it as his right to go attack Venezuela. And we're starting to see the military build up off of the Venezuelan shore. And if you're in the MAGA movement,
$50 million
really
on Maduro's head, $50 million on Nicolas Maduro's head. You could go back into a new profession, Evan. You could go kill Maduro.
Bounty hunter, congressional bounty hunter. I'm not sure how my fiance would feel about that. But so, what was I saying? Oh, so like this is problematic though, because if you want America not to be an interventionist nation and focus on American problems, obviously attacking Venezuela feels very much like going into Iraq. And particularly the fact that Trump is now saying that fentanyl are weapons of mass destruction, which is like, that really feels like we're going back into 2003. The second thing, though, it goes back to the affordability issues, which is putting up a lot of these tariffs. Number one is like drive real consumer costs. And that's everything from your coffee to the cost of beef to supplies that go into building a new home. And so everything's getting more expensive. But they're also not actually helping American businesses grow. They're actually strangling American businesses because the tariffs plus all the other economic uncertainty makes it really hard for businesses to plan. And I see this day to day in my life with the companies that I work with and the CEOs that I'm partnered with, is that it's impossible to think about 6 months down the road or how to invest, what machinery to buy, because there's just so much chaos and it's so arbitrary that you don't know what economic policy for America is going to look like in 3 months or 6 months. Trump has already shown that overnight he'll change his mind.
I mean, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
The first thing you need, why am I not an entrepreneur in India? I was born in India. I grew up in India. And it is because you have no idea what the law will be tomorrow or today evening.
Yeah.
How the regulation will change. You have no idea what tax changes are coming. So businesses seek predictability, at least, because there is plenty for entrepreneurs. There's plenty of uncertainty in their own business. The last thing they want is more uncertainty. That is like, you're dead. Please, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not only businesses, but of humans in general. Like, I think uncertainty is one of the worst things for everybody because uncertainty, sure, there's a chance you win the lottery tomorrow, but there's also a chance you get hit by a car. And just people, all humans hate uncertainty. Businesses really hate it because you have to be able to plan.
Evan, I wouldn't say all humans. Francis Drake loved uncertainty. He was robbing Spanish galleons. So I wouldn't be universalist. Most humans.
That is true. Some people thrive on it, that's for sure. But if you're a family of four and you're struggling to make ends meet, and you just found out that your healthcare costs are going to go up by $1,000 a month, like that's not good uncertainty. That's bad uncertainty. And so I think if you're Trump, if you're a billionaire associated with Trump, if you're Steve Witkoff, Trump is a feature and everything else that's happening is a feature because it means you're amassing power and you have more money now, you have more opportunities to make money, and you have more power and more control. The other 99.999% of Americans are losing out, and it's increasingly become a bug. And so then the question becomes, what is the path forward out of this chaos?
So going back to America, it's a feature for them and it's a bug for the others. But very simple question to you. Is this likely to continue, or is the pendulum likely to swing? Because we are seeing economic inequality of an unprecedented order. In fact, we have to go back to the Gilded Age and the roaring 1920s. And the inequality is not just income. it's the wealth inequality which is the more damning thing. And carried interest is 15%. So you're better off managing money than actually becoming an entrepreneur and creating something, because pushing money around in the financialization of the economy, which ironically I was surprised to see the Times in London, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, which is certainly not a paper of the left, do a full podcast on the financialization of the economy. So it is not just the left talking about it. So we are living in an age where you have legal incentives which skew towards certain professions, maybe because everyone has to run for Congress and needs money. I'm not, of course, alluding to you. You're an honorable chap. But that's one. And then you have loose monetary policy, which has led to phenomenal rise in asset values. So those with assets have got richer, and those without assets, tough luck.
Yeah.
And the combination of this peculiar financial system with massive technological change, with cultural changes, has led to a very polarized, fractured society. And my question is this likely to continue? And also, how will Donald Trump's policies in the coming years affect the global financial and trading system? You've just mentioned tariffs. We know that the WTO, which America created, is pretty much dead. America itself has scuppered it. So what happens to the global financial and trading system? What happens to American economic leadership? Because we know that it is America that provided American economic leadership. It's a coincidence, that before the interview, I picked up the closest water bottle I had, and this is, as you can see, this is the German Marshall Fund. All right, that was American leadership.
You're right.
The Marshall Plan. Okay, and following on from that, what happens to the American economy? Where are we headed, Evan?
Yeah. I mean, so you packed a lot in that question. So let me just tease out a couple of things. The first I'd say is, if you know what Trump's policies are going to be from 18 months from now, you obviously know more about Trump than Trump knows himself.
No, he's consistent on tariffs.
That's true.
He has been for decades. He accused Japan of everything he accuses China of back in the 1980s.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder where he latches onto the ideas from, because you'd think tariffs and the kind of great game theory of international relations, you'd think he was a real scholar of the mid 1800s, but that's obviously not the case. But that's a different tangent. I think the other thing you pointed out was wealth inequality is a real issue, and there is massive agreement on that from Americans. And I think most Americans have kind of understood for a long time that the game is rigged, that the rich and powerful play by their own set of rules. Epstein's a great example of that, where all this stuff is coming out about how Epstein knew all these people, and it's everyone from Larry Summers to Donald Trump. And for years, they got away with abusing kids because they play by a different set of rules. But
from Arkansas boy Bill Clinton to Prince Andrew, from the fanciest palace in the world. Yeah,
and I think that it's really interesting to have this come to light at this moment, because one thing Trump is very transparently doing is he's not only tilting the game, he's directly rigging the game in favor of the rich and the powerful. And you see this in the pardons he gives, right? If you can give $1 million to Trump's super PAC, you can literally get out of jail free. If you can do Trump a favor by bringing him more voters or more business deals, what's the head of Binance, who went to jail for money laundering.
Yes.
Xiaoping Chang, I think it is, right? Did some business deals with the Trump family, helped them launch a stable coin, and he gets out of jail free. And then you have all these scam artists and these private equity guys and these folks who committed financial crime, stole billions of dollars from other Americans, and they get out of jail free because they're rich. Even though they're in jail, they can pay the penalty and give Trump some money. And so the game has been unfair for a long time, and Trump is completely rigging it. So what do you do then? Like, for me, there are a couple things. One is our country desperately needs campaign finance reform, because it is obvious that if you're rich, you're a special interest, you have a lot of power over who gets elected and what laws get written. Mm-hmm. And just as an example, as a candidate for Congress, I spend 40 to 50 hours a week raising money, which is insane, right? Yeah. That is time I should be spending directly interacting with voters. That is time I should be spending working on policy. And it doesn't change when you get elected to Congress. You still have to spend that much time raising money. And so that's why a lot of our laws are written by lobbyists who have their own vested interests. But also, that's why the ultra wealthy and why corporations have so much influence over what happens, is because at the end of the day, if you have money, elections, and that should be very troubling to all Americans. Mm-hmm. And then you also brought up, like, obviously wealth inequality is a huge issue. And that is something that I think is fundamentally, at our current levels, very problematic for having a free democracy, particularly when you compound it with not having campaign finance reform laws in place that prevent the ultra wealthy from having direct influence over the political system, which then lets them rig it even more in their favor. But I think your actual question is probably more about the foreign policy implications of this.
Yeah, because that's what we are discussing. I mean, is this system you're describing here to stay? I mean, I packed a lot in, of course. I asked you about what happens to the global financial and trading system that America has created, right? What happens to economic leadership, again, which America did provide. The dollar is the reserve currency of the world. And what happens to the American economy? They're all interrelated. They're not isolated.
So I think there are basically two pathways here. One is you see J.D. Vance being very much positioned to be Trump's successor. Mm-hmm. There's also a risk of potentially a far-left candidate from the Democratic Party emerging for the presidential nomination in 2028. And I think both of those kind of casts of people would operate the same, which is probably to continue down this path of being anti-everything else, very focused on... I mean, you've heard of
the horseshoe politics, right? The far left and the far right, actually. I gave a talk at Google in 2016 on the global rise of the far right. And I talked about how a lot of the policies of the far right are actually the same as that of the left, in fact, picked up from the left, and vice versa sometimes. So you're right. I mean...
Yeah, and I think in either of those cases, you would have probably a further pursuance of undemocratic policies at home, but also the idea that America should not engage with the broader world, or if it does, it will be through some kind of, let's go attack country X because we have a particular dislike for them. Let's abandon the international order. Let's abandon core institutions of both the United States and our democracy, but also the institutions that help support a good, peaceful, prosperous globe. Mm-hmm. But I think there's also a huge opportunity here for Democrats to chart a path forward that is new, that creates an American economy that works first for Americans, and that then creates, because it builds a better, stronger American democracy, a springboard for us to be global leaders again and to be moral leaders for the world in the way that I think most Americans want us to be leaders of democracy, of prosperity, and of quiet strength.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, yes, it sounds very good. But here's a question for you. How does any American politician balance protecting American jobs and American wages with free trade, immigration, competition, and innovation, because all these things make you very dynamic, but they are, to use a word much abused in Silicon Valley, disruptive.
Yeah. I think that's a really important question, and I think you have to tease them apart a little bit. So, how do you balance protecting American jobs with free trade? The way I like to think of it is it should be enforceable fair trade. And a good example would be China, right? We know China has deliberate national policies of undercutting foreign businesses, be they American or be they European or whatever. So having free trade with China, with a nation that sees itself as an economic and political adversary, doesn't make sense.
So you support the 26, the change Donald Trump brought after winning power in his first term, because Democrats have signed up to the Trump-China policy, because he's the one who imposed tariffs on China.
Right. Like, look, they're an adversary. They have policies that undercut American political and economic strength. Why would we pretend that that doesn't exist? And it's crazy to me that we've known all this stuff for decades, and we haven't had a response. And there's a reason why both Republicans and Democrats finally came around to, okay, maybe free trade with China actually isn't in the long-term interests of the U.S. because China isn't actually engaging fairly with us.
So to be fair, you have to give the devil his due then, to use a proverbial term. Donald Trump deserves credit for changing American policy on China. In that sense, he's a consequential president and a historic president. Yeah.
But I think it's also important to acknowledge that tariffs are a tool. They're not a religion. So you can use tariffs to protect American jobs against China. You can use tariffs to protect critical industries so that we make sure that we keep those at home, coupled with deliberate investment into things that are really, truly essential for national security. So things like medical devices, obviously weapons, obviously all the stuff that goes into high technology with AI that we want to make sure we keep at home, not only because it's important for creating a strong economy, but we don't want to give that stuff up to other nations. And we've always had policies like that, right? We've always acknowledged that we don't. American aircraft like the F-35 to be manufactured overseas. We've always understood that there are certain things you have to protect. But the flip side of that is, like, I don't think Americans want to be we don't want to be the global leader in T-shirt production or sock production. And so there are things that you can say, like, okay, there is a balance here, and we can come up with common sense protocols that both protect American jobs but also make us a good trading partner. So then we talk about, you mentioned AI.
No, I didn't. I was talking about immigration, competition, and innovation. We'll get to AI. Now that you mentioned AI, we'll get to.
You said innovation, I immediately thought AI.
So there's more. By the way, there's more to innovation than AI. One of my friends who's an admiral talks that the big challenge, the big national security challenge for U.S. Navy is lack of welders. They can get sailors. They can't get enough welders. So there's more to innovation, my dear, than AI. But over to you, sir.
So, I mean, immigration, I think of as, again, one of these political tools rather than actually a solution. And so I think there's a game that gets played in D.C., which is that politicians find things to argue over and present them as a binary choice when really it isn't a binary choice. And so the Democrats historically have said, if we want to treat people humanely, then we need to have open borders. And you saw that with Biden's disastrous immigration policies. Whereas Trump has had this narrative that the only way to have secure borders is to militarize the border while conducting mass deportations. And that's a false narrative. You can absolutely have a balance between national security, which means protecting our borders. And as a sovereign nation, we absolutely have the right, and our government has the responsibility to protect our borders, with common sense immigration policies that acknowledge that we should be a nation that attracts talent. And we have people who have been living in the U.S. for 20 or 30 years, who are taxpayers, who are part of the community. And we shouldn't just be ripping those families apart and deporting them. That's not the American way, and that's not what it means to treat people fairly.
So, Evan, very quickly, if I may interject, the argument you often get from J.D. Vance type folks is that too much immigration exerted downward pressure on American wages.
Yeah.
And therefore, America has to close borders because then the supply of labor will go down and then American wages will rise. That is what I was getting at through this immigration question. I'm only responding to what I'm hearing a lot in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. So, again, you do have to acknowledge that some of what they're saying is true and addresses core grievances, right? Like, there was just a massive amount of unrestricted immigration, and that wasn't good for Americans. It also wasn't good for the people coming over. But humans exist in the middle. Americans exist in the middle. There's a balance here between what the left has historically said and what the right has historically said, and that is comprehensive immigration reform, which is a balance between let's have national security, let's protect our borders, let's make sure that we also create pathways to citizenship for people who are law-abiding, paying their taxes, have been here for decades, while acknowledging that we also want to attract good people who want to become Americans and give them pathways to immigrate. I'll give you an example. Rural hospitals. Something like 50% of doctors in rural hospitals are foreign-born. If you were to deport those people, or if you were to stop letting them in, whole communities will not be able to access healthcare. And it's not like you can just turn on a spigot and thousands of more doctors appear overnight, right? It takes a long time to train a doctor.
True.
And that's the balance we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it can work for America, but it can also be smart, pragmatic, and forward-looking.
Yeah. And in a way, that has made America fantastic. I forget who said it. Someone said, look, the Soviet Union or whatever country, you name any country. It could be China. It could be Germany. Their talent is the best of country X, whatever that country X is. Whilst American talent in America, is the best of the world. You walk into MIT and one professor, Hashing Yuang, is Yashing Huang, I hope I'm getting the name right. The fantastic professor, he's Chinese. Sanjay Sarma is Indian, and we could go on. You have extraordinary talent coming in from all parts of the world, and that is what has given America the dynamism, the edge in technological leadership, in entrepreneurship, and in terms of innovation. But then what we are seeing also is this fear that these foreigners come and take away our jobs. These foreigners come and undercut our wages. And the national security strategy comes out very strongly. Its top priority is ending mass migration. So there's also insecurity as well. And that is also something that has happened. So moving on, I think you talked about AI. What does AI mean for the future of American economy? And we've seen this movie before in some ways. The US and USSR had a race for space. Are the US and China now engaged in a AI race?
Yeah, so I guess there's probably a couple things I'd say there. One is that from a policy perspective, the issue with disruptive technologies is that they're disruptive, right? They disrupt things. That is what any kind of industrial revolution or technological revolution does. And so there's a whole discussion.
I have this whole book. I don't know if you can see it.
The transformation of the world.
Transformation of the world, which is this. Only a German could write this book. Jürgen Osterhammel, suitably easy name to remember. But this is a classic, and in fact, the New York Review of Books, Fritz Stern said, indispensable reading for world citizens everywhere. And that is the story of technological disruption. It was massive. Yeah. And even now, the other day, I took Lyft or Uber or whatever with a friend of mine, and the driver said they're seeing a lot of those cars with lidars. This Waymo, I think.
Venmo. No, the Waymo.
Waymo,
Yeah.
I think. Waymo, not Venmo. We are mixing up names. And they said, at some point there may be no need for us.
Yeah.
And what will we do? And this is just one of many industries. I know from people who are in, I think, I'm forgetting one of the big firms, accounting firms. They said they plan to reduce their workforce by 90%.
Yeah.
Given new disruptive technologies. And this is coming to white collar jobs. So, yes, you're right. Disruptive technologies through the centuries have been disruptive, and huge disruption is coming again.
Yeah. So I guess taking your first part of the question, is America in a race for AI with China?
No, the first part was, that was the second part. The first part was, what does it mean for the future of the American economy? And then the next part is, do we have a race?
Well, let me answer the second one first then. So I think, because it's easy to work backwards from here. So I think the answer is yes, we are effectively. And part of this is we don't really know what the creation of AI means, right? And again, it's a disruptive technology. You never really know what you're getting until you're already there. But we know that there is a risk of being outpaced by an adversarial nation, whether it's Russia or China. Russia, I don't have a lot of confidence in them being able to win the race. China,
they're not very good at AI. The Russians are not that good at AI. It's the Chinese who have the money and the numbers to work.
Yeah. And so I think there is a need here for us to be global AI leaders and to win that race. But we can't do that without also protecting American jobs, protecting American data, protecting our kids. And all of those things are currently under risk. And if you don't have common sense protections for American people over what happens, like we know Silicon Valley isn't going to magically regulate itself.
Yeah.
Right? As you mentioned earlier that, all your friends who are CEOs are very focused on the next quarter.
Yeah.
Right? There is, government has a responsibility to protect the people and to think long term. And I don't think we want to rely on Sam Altman to be doing the long term thinking here, right? He's building something.
I mean, very quickly on that point, both Republicans and Democrats, the centrists, agree that there has to be some way to curb Silicon Valley, because many of them are opportunistically raising capital and deferring regulation by saying, look, trust us, because if you don't, then China will win the race. So the China bogeyman argument has become very self-serving and arguably has also contributed to the big bubble that you see. And so many people now, seasoned investors, are talking about this bubble in markets as well. Over to you. You were making the point about Sam Altman.
Yeah, so our government has a responsibility to think long term, which means how do we protect American individuals? How do we protect American jobs? How do we protect our kids? And we've seen all these cases recently appear of kids who end up committing suicide or self-harm because they're being led down a very dark path by AI.
Yeah.
Again, ChatGPT is not going to figure that out, or OpenAI is not going to figure that out that itself. It's not going to make those decisions. It's going to be chasing the dollars. And so we need to have government policies in place that help us win the AI race, but do it safely and do it in a way that protects Americans. I'm particularly worried about young Americans, not only kids who are interacting with these sort of character AIs, which basically emulate a human and converse with them and can either just suck massive amounts of time away from their lives or lead them into places we don't want them to go. But also young Americans who are leaving high school and leaving college and entering this world where a lot of those kind of entry level jobs, be it in accounting, in a law firm where you do a lot of research as a young lawyer, in sales where you do a lot of research and initial outreach as a business development representative, those jobs are rapidly being automated away by AI, or a portion of those jobs are. And so that kind of like apprenticeship pathway into your long-term career is rapidly shrinking and disappearing as those jobs get replaced by AI, or can potentially be replaced by AI.
So AI could potentially increase inequality, destroy ladders of social mobility, and cause havoc in society. We could have what Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek finance minister, calls techno-feudalism on steroids.
Yeah, and I think the first symptom of it will be youth unemployment, and the second will be a ballooning of wealth inequality as people are overnight, certain individuals be making billions of dollars and walking away with tons of money, whereas a lot of other people, you're going to have a few huge winners and a lot of people who are losing out. And so it is the job of government to figure out how to balance that and create an economy that works for everyone while also maintaining technological superiority.
Understood. So we've talked about the risks of AI. There are two other risks, and they are particularly pertinent given that you're in Colorado, which is a water-stressed state, and also where utility bills are going up. AI is energy and water intensive. And if the US gets into this AI race, what is the future of American energy and American water management?
So just some helpful context here when you build a data center. So AI uses a tremendous amount of data. Data centers obviously use a tremendous amount of energy.
Yes.
To produce energy, you often have to have water in place to cool down the turbines for a nuclear power plant or a coal or a gasoline power plant. And so obviously all of that not only puts a tremendous amount of stress on the grid, it means that there is now a lot of demand for a somewhat static amount of energy supply. And that's stressful both to costs, consumer costs, but also to things like the grid in general and grid reliability, and then obviously to water in the American West, which has been under a drought. So I think, the way I think of it is energy security is national security. And I want the U.S. to move towards an energy independent future so that we're not relying.
You sound like Donald Trump. You're reading from the national security strategy.
Well, it's an interesting comment. Don't know how to take that. But I think part of the difference is like I'm a big believer in a green future, right? Yeah. And we like this. I think dovetails really nicely with climate protection because there's an opportunity here, and AI should help us get to that future of how do we transition to a green economy that uses solar, wind, but also nuclear energy to create a grid that is 100% American, that is climate friendly, but also produces affordable energy and manages water a lot better. I don't think America wants to be reliant on Middle Eastern oil. I don't think there's any good reason for us to want to.
But that has gone down. America now is largely energy independent. It has natural gas, which gives America a great competitive advantage. Manufacturing is possible in America, partly because of cheap energy costs and partly because of robotics as well now. And you also have oil. And should America invest in R&D, I'm sure America could solve the clean energy challenge as well, because it's a continent. It is not just a small nation.
Yeah, it's a big nation. We have plenty of energy, and so I think there is a period where it has to be an all of the above energy solution, which involves obviously LNG. It involves oil. but it also involves green technologies, involves nuclear. But I think the future really should be transitioning us closer and closer to that green energy future. Because at the end of the day, like, oil is disruptive to shocks. Everybody sees the prices of the pump go up and down. It's not a good way to build a stable baseload for the grid.
Yeah. So, I mean, The Economist magazine, you studied in the London School of Economics, so you're quite familiar with that 1843 publication, called China an electrostate. The Gulf monarchies are petrostates, or the Gulf countries are petrostates, and China has become the first electrostate because they've invested in batteries, they've invested in solar, they have invested in electric vehicles, they've invested in a whole set of technologies that will power this green energy future you talk about. Evan, you've talked about we've talked about American global leadership, and can America lead again? And can America, a part of that leadership will be these technologies? Can America rediscover its mojo and lead not just in the various things you've talked about, but also in this electrostate transformation that China has practically almost achieved?
Yeah, I mean, I think we absolutely can, and we should. I think there's an interesting nugget there, which is that China manufactures like the vast, I don't know if it's a majority or plurality of green technology. So solar cells, turbines.
It's the majority, I'm told, by my friend who are market analysts. Yeah.
And those are great jobs. That's manufacturing. That is stuff we should be bringing back into the U.S. We should not be relying on China for that. We should be encouraging investment, long-term investment in solar cells, in wind turbines. That not only helps us achieve this green, independent energy future, but it also means we have great paying American jobs. And so there is like a huge opportunity for us to be the leaders there. That benefits America, it benefits American workers, and it also benefits the environment.
Got it. Are you making a pitch for the Joe Biden Green New Deal here?
So I think there's a lot of good in that. I think the execution of the Green New Deal at that particular time was very problematic because it drove up inflation. Right, there was massive purchasing in an already stressed supply chain. And so I think the real thought here needs to be more holistic, which is how do we reshore those supply chains? And so it's not just let's purchase stuff and install it, but let's build it here. Let's reshore our supply chain, reshore our manufacturing, and then implement the long-term changes to energy production and the grid that we need.
To be fair to the national security strategy that talks about reindustrializing, may not be in the industries you champion, but at least that's common ground.
No,
and maybe hope for a future when you're in Congress and you can work with your Republican counterparts and get common sense stuff done.
Yeah. I think there's a huge amount of common ground there. Like, I think there are a lot of people in politics now talking about offshoring is the right way to go forward. So I think there's a lot of common ground to get stuff done in terms of manufacturing. I think some of the things talked about in immigration. I'm even hopeful with campaign finance reform. These are all bipartisan issues that people are finally saying, yes, we really actually care about this. So I'm very hopeful that we can get those things enacted.
And therefore, you're hopeful that America can lead again.
Yeah, exactly. America should be a leader, and I think we can lead again.
Brilliant. Evan Munsing, pleasure. Thank you for your time. Good luck with your campaign. We'll have you back to discuss other interesting and important issues. All the best. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.